site was formerly a coal and oil-fired power station, which was decommissioned in 2012 and demolished between 2014 and 2018. Between then and now, the applicants have spent a significant amount of money removing much of the previous contamination within the site. Quickly flick through the presentation. The red line boundary showing the application site there, and perhaps a bit more helpfully with the Google Earth imagery attached as well for your understanding of context. And I think there you can see the slightly wider area as well. But I'm sure most of you are well aware of the site and its history. Just flicking through some photographs for you here. This is the existing access into the site. I've tried to sort of demonstrate on the map there as to where these photographs are taken from. You can see the adjacent Damhead Creek power station site here, so you can see there's sort of utilitarian buildings in close proximity to the site, and a logistics centre as well, which sits to the north of the application site. I've walked a lot of the public footpaths around the site, including Saxon Shore Way. This is looking northwards towards the application site from that public vantage point. And I've also walked out onto the Riverside Country Park, out onto the spit that sticks into the estuary to gain views from there. And again, it's difficult to gauge from this photograph purely because of the distance between the site and that particular vantage point. Another photograph taken there, looking back towards the application site near to the Amazon depot to the north. So in terms of the site location plan, we can see here the application site outlined in red. The land outlined in blue is that which also sits within the applicant's control, but doesn't form part of this planning application. So you can see their land holding interests, but obviously we're concentrating on the area within the red. Illustrative master plan shown here. As I say, it's an outline planning application at this stage, so it's all for future consideration as part of reserved matters, but this gives an indication as to how development may sit within the application site itself. A plan here showing potential areas of development which relate back to the submission that's been made in the ES, and parameter plans here which shows where areas of wetlands would be, but also looks at potential uses and building heights as well. Some detail here in terms of landscaping and a cross-section of an illustrative cross-section of how the road would be formed, showing tree-lined avenues through the key elements of the scheme. And finally, a sort of illustration there as to a 3D model as to how it would be brought forward. So if you will indulge me, I will just run through some of the history and the key points for consideration this evening. The outline application follows significant pre-application discussions with the authority and as I understand it, 2 member briefings, one prior to submission and one post-submission. So many of you will be aware of these proposals and the context in which they sit. As I said, it's a former power station. The existing jetty, which is attached to the power station, remains in situ, and it's not proposed for that to be removed, but it does fall outside of the application site, so that's not for consideration this evening. But because of the topography of the site, it's relatively flat, and obviously the open views to the sea and to the estuary, there are those 2 sort of visible long-distance vantage points which need to be considered. In terms of the proposal itself, as I say, it's an outline application with all matters reserved for future consideration, aside from access. The applicant is seeking what I would call a relatively flexible permission, which would allow for light industrial uses, general industrial uses, storage and distribution, which may include a data centre and parcel distribution, energy uses, which we'll come on to in a minute, and a lorry park or layover for accommodating lorry drivers. As I say, the applicant has provided an indicative layout for the site and parameter plans which set out the maximum levels of development that could be permitted on the site. And this application is accompanied by an environmental statement which aligns with these parameter plans. So that the evidence that underpins that environmental statement accords with the parameter plans that have been submitted. And as I say, these matters are set out within the committee report. So As a first key issue, I guess we would talk about the principle of development, and I think hopefully that's a relatively uncontentious issue. This is an allocated site within the current Medway local plan, and the proposed uses are consistent with the text and preamble, the supporting text for the policy, and also the Council's overarching strategy of providing a suitable level of employment land in the right locations. This is a site that's been identified for a number of years for employment purposes, and as I say, our understanding, our interpretation is that it does accord with policy in that regard. So perhaps the more detailed points for consideration, I think perhaps the first one being the energy from waste centre that's proposed within the application site. Whilst the existing policy preamble refers to the provision of an energy from waste facility, that's based upon the Kent waste strategy from that period in time, i.e. the late 1990s, early 2000s, and obviously things have moved on from there. More recent policy and decision making has taken place. Members will also be aware of the existing energy from waste facilities in Aylesford and Kemsley, which provides significant capacity for the use of waste for the production of energy in and around Kent. The report sets out the waste hierarchy and how that should be interpreted and used to inform decision making, and that's a key consideration for the determination of this application. Effectively, the waste hierarchy seeks to ensure that waste is managed in the most sustainable way possible. This seeks a reduction in waste in the first instance, then reuse, repair, recycling, and then recovery, followed by the disposal of waste. And that's set out on page 64 of your papers this evening. There's a diagram there which sets that out hopefully quite clearly. To put it simply, the hierarchy seeks to prevent the use of waste for energy as a preference above recycling or reuse. With the over-provision of facilities of this nature, it could be commercially preferable to use waste for energy over and above recycling or reusing. So it's a balance to be found in terms of where and when these facilities should be provided. I've referred in the report to a recent decision on the Kemsley facility who are looking to expand, and that was refused on the basis that would have resulted in an over-provision of waste to energy facilities in and around the area. So, as I say, from our perspective, that was a sticking point, if you like, in terms of the application itself. So, through negotiations with them, we've highlighted that as a problem, and effectively the applicant has come back with a strategy which would ensure that the energy facility would power and heat this site only, i.e. it's to be a sustainable form of energy production only for this site. It's not intended to be a commercial entity beyond providing power for this particular site. And there's two reasons primarily for that. One is that there's insufficient electricity within the grid to power the floor space that's proposed here, irrespective of its previous use, because of its location now, and the applicant have had this confirmed with correspondence with the National Grid that there is insufficient power in this location for particularly the high-end users. Secondly, it would allow for the energy costs for future occupiers to be known and to be managed, and the road for this site might result in significant traffic movements of waste from outside of the area, and that could come from places such as Suffolk or beyond. So that remained a concern for us. And this would have been harmful to the waste hierarchy in which we've referred to in the report. So it's on this basis that, again, through dialogue with the applicant, they provided clarity on the material to be used and have identified a material referred to as RDF, which is a material where recyclable material is removed from waste, and it's the non-recyclable material being formed into pellets that can then be used. So in terms of the waste hierarchy, it's preferable for that material to be used. Some of the RDF that's produced in this country at the moment can be dispensed to places like Holland and to Germany to be used in energy plants in those locations. So to retain it in the country is considered to be sustainable. It's also important to note that there's a facility within Medway that currently produces 200,000 tonnes of RDF per annum, and it actually has the ability to produce 400,000 tonnes, although it doesn't at this point in time. So, in addition to the production of energy for the site, the energy hub could also produce heat which can be provided to the units on the site there, therefore, again, being considered a bit more sustainable. These two matters have been sought to be controlled by condition, and there's a number of conditions that are set out within the papers and the additional paper on your desks this evening, which effectively seek to ensure that the power and the heat generated is for this site only and is not as a net exporter to the grid, because that would then go against the waste hierarchy and could be harmful, which would tip the balance out of favour for this proposal. So I hope that gives a bit of an overview about the energy for waste element of the scheme. Obviously, we can go back to that if you have any questions. I think the other key issue for this proposal is transportation highways, in terms of congestion and air quality as well. So clearly the existing highway network, as one moves from the site towards the conurbation of Medway, is constrained, both in terms of congestion and air quality. We're also advised that junction 1 of the M2 is constrained to a point where additional development, and that's additional development beyond that committed to, not necessarily built out, would result in a level of harm considered unacceptable to national highways. So, as set out within the report, Medway have secured significant funds to upgrade the highway network within the area as part of the HIF bid for the Hoo Peninsula. I won't, at this point, seek to preempt future planning policy and acknowledge that this is subject to change in direction from the local planning authority and also planning applications that have yet to have been submitted. But nevertheless, it's important to acknowledge that the work has been done in the background on that particular mitigation. This mitigation could help certainly unlock this site. With their provision, the modelling indicates capacity within the highway network locally for this development. However, we also have to be mindful as to what happens if the HIF development doesn't come forward in its current guise or not at all. And because of the level of uncertainty at this point in time, that's a slightly more tricky proposition to do. So what we've sought is for delegated powers to be permitted to negotiate with the applicants the level of contributions required, which would be proportionate to the impact that they would have on the highway network. And that's to ensure that we can get the best possible solution in terms of mitigation, and perhaps not just to mitigate the impact of this proposal, but to ensure that we're dealing with all of the proposals that are coming forward, all of the known proposals that are coming forward at that point in time. As I say, this would be subject to the provision of a suitable Section 106 agreement, which we will negotiate with the applicants. With regards to the strategic road network, i.e. the motorway, this is perhaps a more immediate issue, with National Highways initially placing a hold and objection against the development. They've now agreed to a monitor and manage approach that would allow for the development to take place with constant management of the transport impacts over the period of its development. This approach has been used elsewhere and would ensure that development does not fall foul of committed developments which may or may not come forward. And we could look at, for example, the national grid sites, which has got a permission, but there are question marks over its deliverability. With these suggested conditions and through the imposition of a 106, we're content that we are able to ensure that suitable mitigation can be brought forward for the highway network. In terms of ecology, biodiversity, obviously the site sits within a particularly sensitive location of regional and national importance. And therefore the applicant was required to submit a significant amount of information on this basis. In summary, whilst the site does support protected species, there is, for example, a badger set on site, there are other sort of foraging and commuting that takes place across the site as well. Because of the previous use, the level of hard standing within the site, there is actually an opportunity for betterment to be created through the delivery of open spaces and SUD systems. With regards to the impact of ecology and biodiversity within the sites, actually we believe that the scheme coming forward is likely to result in potential for betterment. Careful consideration does also have to be given to species that sit or reside outside of the site, and in particular the bird population. And again, we have suggested conditions which look at the levels of acoustic harm, if you like, that could be caused by piling, etc., from percussive acoustic work, particularly for wintering migrating birds. And again, these have been agreed with the applicant and with our internal consultees. With regards to design and appearance, again, because of the type of uses we're looking at, the buildings are going to be fairly utilitarian in appearance, relatively sort of big boxes, if you like. But this is a location that can accommodate development of scale without causing significant harm. The site sits within an open landscape with a recent history of large commercial buildings and structures, and again, very, very much commonplace within the immediate and wider locality. However, as we've set out in the report, it's important that once within the site, the buildings and the landscaping are designed and addressed appropriately, so that there's a human scale, if you like, when one's within the site, so that we've talked about using brick plinths, and we've talked about getting good landscaping in at a very early stage to ensure that it's a high quality development once you're in there, because I think it's certainly a site that should and can bring that forward. In terms of other issues, residential amenity, it's a site it's fairly remote in terms of residential properties. There is one that sits to the south-west of the application site, but that's set behind a bun and acoustic fence, and also the buildings are set off that boundary quite significantly, or are shown to be within the indicative master plan, so it's not considered there's any great risk to residential amenity. Heritage is an important issue. And in particular the Who Fort and Darnett Fort, which are scheduled ancient monuments. Again, an assessment's been carried out in terms of the impact upon those, which is considered to be acceptable, as is the impact on the nearby Grade 1 listed church, where the distance and also the degree of landscaping provision between the two sites ensures that the setting of that building isn't compromised. Matters such as flooding, contamination, archaeology, drainage, are fully considered within the main body of the report, so hopefully they're all relatively clear to members. So you'll be pleased to hear that I'm now going to conclude. This proposal complies with both national and local policy, and national guidance. In terms of the benefits, the proposal would bring about significant investment and jobs to Medway within an area identified as being suitable for that type of growth. The proposal could enhance the local environment through the reuse of vacant sites and bring about betterment to ecology, biodiversity. In terms of disbenefits, there would be the potential for some harm to the waste hierarchy, albeit mitigated in part by the power and heat generation proposed. And without intervention, obviously there is an impact on the local and strategic highway network. However, these concerns, we believe, have been adequately addressed by the applicant and through the imposition of conditions in 106. As with any application, these matters need to be considered and balanced prior to determination. However, officers of the view that the benefits significantly outweigh any potential harm with the proposal in front of you this evening. I do, however, request that the recommendation be slightly amended to allow for delegated powers for minor amendments to be made to the conditions, as well as the 106, and this would be for matters of detail only, for example, with regards to the timing of phasing or detailed design points, rather than matters that would go to the heart of the permission, which obviously would be of interest to your good self. So I hope that's a helpful summary, and obviously if there's any questions thereafter, that would be great. So thank you very much. Oh, sorry, yes. The additional paper on your desk this evening, which sets out 2 further conditions which relate to the waste element, or the energy from waste element of the scheme as well, which need to be considered as part of the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, members, over to you. Councillor Tranter.
Thank you, Chair. I'll probably be, I'm sure colleagues have questions on a number of different areas, but since you quite rightly in your report and presentation talk about the socio-economic impact, which is included in Chapter 6 of the NPPF, I just wanted to explore that just a little bit more to make sure I've understood it, because clearly we'll be balancing these benefits against impacts and costs related to the roads and so on and so forth. So approximately 2,055 jobs, which is interesting. I'm assuming that in the context of the report is referring to the full-time jobs that will be on the site when it's up and running and fully complete, as opposed to during the construction phase. Thank you. Sometimes we get confused between the two. So, the first part of the question is, of the 2,055, I went through the report, but I want to make sure I understand it quite well. Are you able to explain how many of those jobs one might call skilled jobs in the long term, so that our children and grandchildren will have good career progressions on this site of interesting work, and not just being a lorry driver or something, nothing wrong with lorry drivers, but you know what I'm saying. So there'd be a range of jobs. And can you say a little bit more about the range of skill sets that will result from this? It also mentions within the report during the construction phase. Well, that's a bonus rather than anything, so I'm not quite so interested in that. So I'm just focusing on when it is mature. Can you say, add a little bit more meat to the bone in terms of the quality of those jobs, and as much as you can? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. With regards to the construction phase jobs, I tend to agree with your good self. I think it's something that needs to be put into the mix. I don't necessarily think it would tip the balance in favour of this application. But nevertheless, it's something that obviously should be borne in mind. With regards to the other jobs, it very much depends on the types of uses that come forward on the site. As I said in the presentation, it's a relatively flexible permission that they're seeking, and we have been informed, for example, that there's a strong likelihood that there would be a data centre on site, which by definition is likely to bring forward perhaps a relatively small number, but well-paid jobs as part of that process. What I would also say, and this comes from my experience of working in other projects of warehousing, much of the warehousing now also requires a significant logistics element to it, which in itself is quite sort of data-driven and represents quite skilled jobs as well. So. And you've probably seen that as well in terms of the Amazon depot that's come forward. Yes, obviously there are your delivery drivers and there are perhaps more manual jobs there, but sitting above that there's a tier of management, and there's a tier of the sort of administrational jobs that come with that. I'm not able to sit here and give you any definitive answers, because it very much depends, like I say, on who comes forward within the site, within the parameters that have been agreed. What we've set out there is really what we think is possible for the site, but clearly the element of control that comes with that, I guess, will be through the delivery in part of the reserve matters applications, in terms of what comes forward for the site, and those end users that will be looking to deliver the development as it comes forward. It will also be relatively flexible moving forward. So, excuse me. The first users, for example, may be very different to the users that are sat there in year 10. But what I would say is that the uses that have been put forward are relatively varied. I don't think there's a strong indication that this would all be B8 storage and distribution, for example. I think there is a clear indication that they would like to see a variety on here. But like I say, unfortunately, I can't give you any certainty at this point in time. I hope that's helpful.
No, well, that's all I want to know is what you know at the moment, but I appreciate what you're saying. Thank you.
Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your report. I mean, obviously, this is a hugely important site, and the principle of developing it for employment use and industrial use is key here. I have got a number of concerns, and if I may, I'll just go through some detailed ones and then come back to substantial issue in a moment. I just wanted to refer to condition 20, which is about the landscape management on there. And I know this is raised by the Environment Agency. They mentioned this about biodiversity net gain, which isn't mentioned in the landscape and ecology management plan. So it would be good to have that incorporated within that condition if we could have that. And as I say, the Environment Agency do refer to it later in the report. So it'd be nice to see that happen, because obviously this is right slap bang in an internationally important bird area. And Medway is renowned for the quality of this area, partly, and not to incorporate net gain either within the site or contributing to the wider environment area, is crucial. So that would be nice to see. And then in relation to condition 33, which is about the alternative transport, it talks about no development should take place without a travel plan has been submitted. Such details approved should be carried out. So that there was sort of sorry, I'm just catching up my words here. Seeks to ensure this development seeks to encourage alternative transport. Can it not actually provide it? Rather than just encouraging it. That's my request there. We want to ensure there is alternative transport to the site, not just encouragement of it. So that would be nice if we could incorporate that in conditions. And then just moving on to, again, with condition 34, referring to parking, obviously that's future-proofing so that there is significantly more electric charging available on site than is perhaps being proposed at the moment. Perhaps every parking space could have a charger. I don't know if that's possible, because by 2030 everybody's going to hopefully be buying electric cars, and that's not that many years away. So again, in condition 34 there. And then I wondered about I've got a slight question. I'm slightly confused. And so I'd like just help me on this one if you can, in relation to page 67, where you talk about the waste to energy issue and a development consent order. Why, can you just go through again, if that's all right, why is that we can't be generating energy here for use in the community? If it's that green, it should, I'm just not quite sure why it just has to remain, the heat and energy have to remain within the site. Why can't it be made available to the grid? So I wasn't particularly clear about that. And in relation to that, that brings on to one of my substantive points, which is about the jetty. Obviously, I understand that the pellets are actually being manufactured at Chatham docks, and it seems crazy if we have to drive them around in a lorry through Who to get there, when they could actually just be shipped across the river in about, I don't know how long it would take to get a boat of chips across the river, but they're probably a lot quicker and very much greener. So I'm wondering why the jetty is excluded from this proposal. That's a really crucially important question, because the redevelopment of that jetty would make this site really much more sustainable than it is by using the road for all the transport issues. So that's kind of a key question that I've got. And then moving on to the more substantive issues, and this is in relation to the conditions at the top, on page 37, I believe it is, right at the start of the report, recommendation A and recommendation B. I'll go to those. So, starting with A, obviously I've got concerns that I think this committee does need to see the 106 arrangements on this one. This is a hugely important site, and to know exactly how that 106 money is being distributed and how it's being used is something, I believe, something for this committee to have a look at. So I would ask that not to be delegated, if that's possible, Chair. Thank you. And then on recommendation B, the second sentence there, such contributions sought shall be proportionate to the level of traffic generated by the scheme when assessed against other commitments within the peninsula. The Who Development Framework, which is currently out to consultation with the public, is a huge part of this. And this scheme is not within the Who Development Framework consultation. And yet I think it should be. However, it's not. And the money for the road improvements, in particular, the Housing Infrastructure Fund, by its very name, housing, isn't for this project. And yet in the report, you constantly refer to the HIF money being available to make the improvements necessary to cope with the traffic generated by this project. And, according to condition B, other commitments within the peninsula. Well, the HIF money was very specifically for housing. and the generation of traffic from that. And this is not housing, this is employment and industrial use outside of the WHO development framework. So I am very concerned that the HIF money, are we trying to spend it twice here? I've got worries about that, and I appreciate some clarity as to why the HIF money is seen to be sufficient to cope with this new traffic from this development, which is outside of the WHO development framework. So that's a big concern I have there as well, Chair. So from my point of view, I'm struggling with this. I like the principle of development is fantastic. What's being done with the site is really lots of good stuff going on. But at this stage, I feel that we're premature. This is almost as if this development should be part of the emerging local plan, but it certainly should be looked at in connection with the WHO development framework and the connection between the two issues and other issues that are going out on the peninsula as well. So I am really concerned, and I feel that we are a little bit premature with this application at this stage until we know the full implications of it around transport, around the development of the jetty and the use of the river to supply the area, and in relation to the use of the HIF money for this as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, thank you for the question. I think there's some good points there, which hopefully I can try to address. With regards to condition 20, biodiversity net gain, I am in agreement with you. I think it would be sensible to look to include the 10% net gain within there. I think it's eminently feasible with the scheme that's been brought forward. So I think that would certainly be a positive step in terms of the application. In terms of the transport or the travel plan, yes, again, I agree that I think some meaningful transport infrastructure would be helpful. I've visited the site quite a few times, and I noticed on several occasions there's an Amazon bus that runs up and down the road there, presumably collecting members of staff. And you know, for example, there may be the opportunity to work in collaboration with other businesses nearby to utilise those facilities, or indeed to bring forward their own provision for members of staff moving to the site rather than to rely on the private car. So all of those elements should be considered by the applicant as part of their travel plan moving forward, because I think certainly it would be beneficial to have as many people travelling to and from the site that work there by sustainable means. With regards to the parking management plan, condition 24, in truth, I don't think it would be possible for every site to be provided with an electric charging point at this point in time. I certainly understand the sentiment and would concur that there is a shift in that direction. I think the infrastructure costs of doing so at this point in time, given the level of electric car ownership, would perhaps be slightly too onerous at this point in time. But nevertheless, I think to push the applicant to provide as many electric charging points as possible, I certainly think is something that should be encouraged. With regards to the DCO question and the energy and the wider community, it is a bit of a tricky one insofar as I say, that there have been recent decisions which have prevented the expansion of nearby facilities to provide additional energy from waste. And the reason being is the impact on the waste hierarchy, which would, prevent or certainly discourage people from recycling or reusing materials. So it's for that reason that we've sought for this site to, I suppose the term is to wash its own face in terms of energy production, because there is then an argument to say, well, by having this provision on here, irrespective of the impact on the waste hierarchy, if you like, is sustainable because it's providing an energy source for a committed development, i.e. a development that we know is going to happen. And like I say, it's not just the electricity, but it's the heat generation as well from that particular development. What there is the opportunity for here is, should wider development come forward on the WHO Peninsula, for that to tap in to this facility. Because let's not forget, it will be a commercial facility after all, and they will be able to come back into a local planning authority and seek to vary conditions or seek to amend a planning application to have a larger facility, should it be appropriate to do so. The applicant has indicated they would be willing to facilitate expansion to, for a heat network in the surrounding area. However, at this point in time, we have to work on the basis of commitments and known development. So we can't insist upon it, because clearly the policy position and the development position at this point in time is not such that we can insist upon it hitting those additional units. With regards to the jetty, again, I'd probably in general agreement with the points that you raised. I think if it can be used, it should be. The applicants have not included it within the application site. Obviously, that's a decision for them. And I assume they've done that for good reason, because it would potentially add uncertainty to it. However, through discussions with them, it's been very clear that there isn't any intention for that jetty to be removed. And commercially, if it is viable, I've no doubt that it will be used. And at the end of the day, it will always come down to the commercial viability of doing so. And if that means a cheaper way or a quicker way of moving materials, then that at that point in time can be looked into. It's a big structure. I've walked underneath it. It's a very large structure, and it is intended to be retained. In terms of the substantive issues that you raised with regards to the Section 106 agreement and highway funding, again, those points are understood. Discussions are ongoing. I think from our perspective, it's a matter of detail, but there are options available. Obviously, we've sought delegated powers. It may be that it could be delegated to officers, the chair and group spokespersons for consideration. Or obviously, if you feel strongly, you are able to bring the Section 106 back before all members as well. That's a matter for you to consider as to what is most appropriate. And with regards to the other commitments, the framework and the HIF funding, again, it's a difficult one, because clearly the wheels are in motion, if you like, for that process to be undertaken. That the pre-application, the process is underway, and an application will be forthcoming for those elements. So we need to consider it. I fully understand that it's a infrastructure bid based upon housing. However, I would argue that people that live in houses require jobs, and obviously a facility here would be in quite close proximity to where those new houses could be, and I would suggest that would be a relatively sustainable form of employment opportunity. So whilst it's called a HIF bid, I think it does encapsulate more than just housing, and I'm not saying that it should be used. This scheme is only acceptable because of it. There are other alternatives, but nor should we ignore it as an entity. I'm going to pass the buck entirely in terms of whether it should be included within the framework. That's beyond my remit in determining this application. But certainly, again, what I would say is, in terms of the prematurity, this is an allocated site from 2003. It's in the local plan from 2003. It accords with that policy. So I would argue that in terms of prematurity, that would be very hard to argue, but I don't disagree with the spirit of what you're saying in terms of comprehensive development. There would be benefits in doing so. I just think we're not at the point in time where we can insist upon it. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Is it okay if I come back now, or shall I wait to...
I think I would like to share it.
Thank you.
Councillor Galvin.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I certainly welcome this. I think it's a very good development for Medway. This has been an industrial site for many, many years. And in fact, I think it's welcome that the job density is actually increased substantially, because in its existing use as a power station, it didn't actually employ many people. So we're actually going to get more employment opportunities out of the site than we've ever had. So I think from that side, I'm extremely happy, because we need to provide employment opportunities for our young people, and this helps. I'd like to just explore the heat element just a little bit. And by the way, I thought there was a lovely typo in there when it referred to black bad waste instead of black bag waste. So that was quite. At this afternoon's procurement board, one of the items on the procurement board was to procure the services of experts in district heating systems to take further forward up to a business case level both the Chatham come Gillingham proposed heat networks, which are quite well advanced, but that's going to be using river-based heat source pumps, taking heat out of the River Medway. But there was also, in that item, specific mention of the WHO proposals, which are not as well advanced. So it was inferred in that paper that this would be the source of that heat. So I think we need to get ourselves a little bit joined up here as to what's going on, because obviously you will need extra heat to be exported from the site in order to do that. So I think that's quite important that we get our ducks all in a row on that. I've got to say, when it comes to the waste hierarchy, I know there's probably nothing I'm going to say will change anything, but the thought occurs to me we're looking at it wrong, because whilst I'm 100% enthusiastic on recycling, an avid recycler at home myself, the reality is, unfortunately, a lot of plastic and clothing waste that is now classed as recyclable and recycled is sent abroad for processing, and it's sent to third world countries, Africa, Indonesia, not a third world country, but Turkey, where there's been a lot of reports of waste plastic being burnt in the open air. I think to make a religion out of recycling and say, well, it's all good, it's good if it's processed properly, but there's very strong evidence at the moment to suggest that a huge amount of material is leaving the United Kingdom for third world countries and basically just dumped on them. There's beaches in Africa covered in used clothing that's come from the UK. They can do that, assess that from the labels. So, but that aside, I do have a question on that. Whether, and I would like you to get together with the people in the capital projects team. So Rob Dennis would be a good contact for that. So we've got a sort of, but back to this particular development itself, I think it's really good news for Medway. Hopefully we can get some really first-class job opportunities out of this for the future. And ideally, it's the right sort of site because it is a brownfield site. It's a traditional industrial site, has been for the whole of my lifetime, and that's just the sort of site that we want to develop. So I very much welcome this, and I will be voting for it this evening.
Yes, thank you. Very quickly, with regards to the Hoo Peninsula and the heating system, obviously set out in the report the opportunity. What this would give is greater certainty as to what is happening on this site. So if there were to be future discussions about your ongoing strategy, your future strategy, obviously if there is an extant permission on this site, or at least a resolution, that carries greater weight in those conversations. So hopefully that will be helpful. And as I say, it's a commercial entity. I've no doubt if they've got the opportunity to heat a few thousand homes, they'll probably jump at the chance, if I'm perfectly honest with you. With your wider point with regards to the waste hierarchy, why it's important, and it may seem like a minor point, is that the operations at Aylesford and at Kemsley will obviously be looking very carefully at other decisions that are being made elsewhere. And with applications being refused in the High Court, that obviously is a strong material consideration in the determination of that application and others within the vicinity. So the reason that we've really pushed the applicant in this instance is to ensure that the decision is robust and cannot be challenged. And that's why it's really important that we give significant weight to the waste hierarchy. And I concur with your views about how waste is perhaps in reality managed, but we have to work on the principles of what the policy and what the legislation says. So just to be clear, I'm generally in agreement with you, but it is important because we want to ensure that the decision is robust and isn't subject to challenge thereafter. Thank you.
Councillor Hackwell. Just to advise, I have Councillor Hackwell, Councillor Hallcroft-Scott, Councillor Hubbard, and then I go back to Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd say I welcome this development and use of brownfield as employment area. It's good to see that someone's breathing back some life into an old industrial site. My concerns really are around how we arrived at some of the decisions we've arrived at, like 2,000 employees. I mean, if those 8 sheds just end up being distribution and storage, you're unlikely to reach 2,000 employees in distribution and storage in 8 sheds. Second thing is, you say that the power generation will only be for this site. I would imagine if it was just storage and distribution, you wouldn't need a power station to do that. So what was the what was the decision? What was the scenario given to the national grid to make their statement to say they couldn't power it? I can imagine if it was a data centre, you know, a lot of power would be required. But if they end up being storage and distribution, do we need a power station? Is really the question. Secondly, in the paper it says that it's a short walking distance from the new station. Well, 45 minutes is not really a short walking distance. So again, I'd like to understand, you know, is there plans to put a shuttle bus on between the station and the employment area, and could that be conditioned? Because I don't think 45 minutes is a short walk. So those are really the comments I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Again, with regards to the employees, because it's an outline application with that flexibility that's been sought, we've had to take, or the applicants, I should say, have had to sort to look at the possible employment on the site. And actually, in some respects, because of the transport modelling that's had to be done, they've effectively looked at it may be the worst case scenario for traffic, but actually it may be the best case scenario in terms of employment. So what you've got there is probably a relatively high number. That said, obviously it is an allocated employment site, and that allocation allows for a breadth of different uses, including B8 storage and distribution. So what we have to work with, obviously, is the parameters that are set by the planning policy, and that allows for those different uses. My view is it's probably likely you will get more than just storage and distribution, and the reason being is in part due to the distance from the motorway network. It's probably a very suitable site for places like Amazon, which are then distributing locally, but for a wider distribution network, they tend to want to be located immediately on the motorway junctions. They want to be right on the M20, the M2. So to be out at Grain isn't necessarily their preferred location. So I think in reality, there's likely to be a breadth of different employment uses there, but obviously that will be subject to further reserved matters applications. In terms of the question with regards to the power generation, what we have done is condition 10 in the report sets out that if there is a lower requirement for power usage, which we've identified as 27.5 megawatts, that is effectively the baseline figure that can be produced. And that's been based upon work that the applicant have submitted to us, which shows if it was all B8 storage and distribution, that is the power that would be required. So what we've said is, this is your base point. This is what this permission allows you to do. If you come in with reserve matters for a data storage unit, if you come in with something with a higher requirement, that can effectively be ratcheted up to 49.9 megawatts. And the reason it's set at 49.9 is because beyond that, it doesn't become a decision for the local authority, it becomes a decision for the planning inspectorate through a DCO. So we have tried to control that through that condition, because it's an important point that we are ensuring, like I say, it's only consuming its own smoke on this site. It's not going beyond that. With regards to the point about the railway station, again, there's an element of uncertainty, shall we say, about the delivery of the train station. But what I would say is we have touched upon the necessity for a travel plan, and I think in a site like this, that should be more than probably using the wrong term, but a wishy-washy document. I think it should be quite a specific document which sets out exactly what would be proposed, and I think that they should really be looking at putting forward, shuttle bus services, wherever that might be to and from. That's for them to consider at that point in time. But as I say, I know that the Amazon unit has that facility, and given that this is likely to be a larger facility overall, I would have thought that it would be very pragmatic and sensible to have a very similar service, if not a better service than what they put on. So I'm in complete agreement that that should be a requirement for any consent that occurs here. Thank you.
Councillor Holcroft-Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm really concerned and troubled about the lorries and the transport and the traffic. And I do think the jetty and stuff, things like that might alleviate that. But there's a really big issue there. And then also the IF funding, what's that being used for? Because it's supposed to be about protecting the environment, and I'm not sure whether that's going to be helpful here.
Thank you, Chair. Without wishing to sound like a broken record, I fully understand your concerns, and I tend to agree that the traffic in and out of the site is obviously one of the key issues here. What I would say that this is, in addition to it being an allocation for this particular use, it's also a residual employment need for Medway that's to be provided here. So if this employment isn't provided here, it will need to be provided somewhere else within the borough or within the administrational boundaries. And whilst we haven't undertaken any kind of sequential analysis as to whether there are alternative, better sites, because it is an allocation, so there isn't the necessity to do so, I guess it's a question, for your future strategies to think, well, would there be less constrained areas in terms of the highway network? Would there be less constrained areas in terms of the landscaping within Medway that could accommodate this level of growth? I would argue perhaps not, and I don't know because I haven't done that sequential analysis. But it's certainly something that you need to bear in mind when you're making a decision on this application, that it's, as I say, an allocation already, and not just that, but this employment is needed somewhere within Medway. As with any application, and I've dealt with many in my time, there are always disbenefits. There's always an element of harm, and that needs to be balanced against the benefits that a scheme brings forward. And in this instance, we felt that the additional traffic that was being generated, and it will be noticeable, it will have an impact on local people, is weighed against, as I say, the evidence that underpins the previous local plan and perhaps emerging plans, and also the other benefits that the site brings about of a brownfield site being brought forward for employment uses. Again, with regards to the HIF funding, the reason I've referred to it in the report is because it does unlock growth. It does unlock the potential for growth. And this falls within the banner, if you like, of growth. So it is important to consider that, as an authority, you are potentially getting very significant infrastructure delivered in this part of the world, shall we say. And again, that's another reason from my perspective why you should be looking to perhaps point development in that direction where that infrastructure may be delivered, rather than looking at alternative sites. So like I say, everything is about balancing it up, and no planning application that comes before you, I'm sure, is ever perfect in that regard. But to my mind, the benefits here do outweigh the disbenefits as to which you've alluded to. Thank you.
Councillor Hubbard.
Thank you. The previous use of this site was obviously a very dirty coal-powered station. But one of the things it did have was its advantage that it was employment sustainable, because my father-in-law and my wife worked there, and they lived locally. And there was quite a lot of people who worked at the power station who lived in the locality. So this site is going to be for a large amount of properties which will actually be where people will drive into the site for employment. And it's just not heavy goods lorries, it's cars. And the biggest issue on this application site is the traffic to the site. We know that the 228 is a single track, well, a single road in and a single road out. And the impact of increased traffic at the moment is actually hitting not only the local ward of Peninsula or Strood Rural, but in fact my ward as well, Strood North. So my main concern is the traffic generation of this site. I think that saying, oh, look, the HIF, that's something we can latch onto. The HIF, by its word, is Housing Infrastructure Fund. It isn't Industry Structure Fund. So we've got to ensure that we have, if this is passed tonight, that we have a decent amount of Section 106, and therefore I don't think it should be delegated to officers. We need to come back to this committee, because what we have heard over recent meetings is the fact that developers of all types wanted to get out of the existing Section 106. We need to make sure they come and demonstrate that they will provide Section 106, because if we are going to do something about this, the 228, we need that infrastructure, not just relying on HIF. And the other thing, don't worry about the railway station. I can't imagine the railway station ever coming into being. So we need to make sure if there is a transport strategy, it needs to make sure that it is linking into sustainable bus routes in and out of the locality that is Strood, of course, and maybe into Gravesend. So to me, it is the highways is the biggest issue, and I'm not quite sure how we're going to really address that. Yes, I can recognise it's a brownfield site. It's been sitting around for an awful long time. It's been even in the previous local plan talking about what we're going to do with this potential site. Maybe we should have been waiting for the next local plan to come into being, because we need to actually really discuss it in depth about the impact of this site and other developments on the Hood Peninsula. So my concern is highways, and I really can't support it as it is. There's no need to give an answer to that. You can go straight to Councillor Curry.
Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for your responses to my earlier comments. I just want to come back on a couple of issues, if I may, Chair, in relation to the importance of this development. I mean, as I said at the start, I think this is a really important site, and we are looking to develop it for employment as a key strategic employment site for the whole of Medway. And I think that's my point, really, is that I don't think that dealing with it as a planning application in isolation is the right approach at this stage. I think we're premature with it. The fact that it could be, and again, it's uncertainties in here, a wider site for generating power for the neighbourhood around there is important, and that's a strategic issue for Medway. The fact that the jetty could come into play at some point soon, again, that's another Medway strategic issue, and also the fact that those infrastructure projects would have a much wider impact, if you like, in terms of what's going on in this area. I think also in relation, I mean, in the report you very specifically mentioned Four Elms Hill and Sanpurl roundabouts being impacted, and the fact that it's two AQMAs are being impacted by additional traffic. That's a strategic issue for Medway, a much wider strategic issue as well. And we're accumulating these strategic impacts that this site has for Medway as a whole. You referred to the 2003 local plan. That was 20 years ago. We have moved on so much since then. I think that carries very little weight now. I'm not saying it shouldn't be an employment site. I think it should. But I think that the weight of what was the arguments back in 2003, we've moved on a lot since then, in particular because of the Who development that's taking place, 10,000 plus houses on Who, which is likely to come along. You referred to the uncertainty around the railway station. We've got some uncertainties in there as well. So combining the strategic issues that this site has and the uncertainties that we're currently working with, I feel that this application is premature. I would like to make two proposals, if I may, Chair. The firstly, to defer, if we can, and come back with more detail as to how some of these strategic issues are going to be dealt with. And in addition to, if members are minded to approve tonight, then I think that the two recommendations at the start of the report, A and B, those should be taken out, and we should have a chance to look at the Section 106 agreements and stuff like that at this committee. So those, I hope that makes sense, Chair, in terms of my proposals that I'd like to put forward. Thank you.
Yes, that does make sense. It's been said that this application is premature. Now, I'm going to disagree with Councillor Curry insofar as this, first of all, is an employment site. It was an employment site. It's previously used land. It has been, as Councillor Hubbard is fully aware, put into the 2003 plan. We might be 20 years on, but we've been working 20 years to try to get this employment in this location. So we have to determine the application because it is here before us, and that is the whole part of the process that we should determine it. There were always going to be implications for traffic, but there's also comment about the housing which will go at who. Well, it would seem to me that the most sustainable approach is that if there is going to be housing at who, there is also employment at who. And I think that you need to make sure that these things move along in tandem. We have been waiting a long time for these sort of developments to come forward. We owe it to the people across the whole of Medway to make sure that we have the opportunities for them to have employment in years to come. This is not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a progress. Much has been said about the HIF fund, the infrastructure, and hopefully it will come. But also that infrastructure will support other things as well. So I'm urging members not to defer this application. If they wish to have the details of the 106 come through, so be it. But I think that deferral, I'm not quite sure what the deferral is actually for. So I would urge members to be bold and to go forward with what I think is right for Medway. So I'm going to move to the Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Members, I move approval. The approval is subject to a 106 agreement under the 1990 Act, and linked within the terms of that, Section 106, I include within my proposal that delegated powers should be given to the head of planning, as set out at point B on the agenda at page 37. And thirdly, that conditions be attached to the general consent, which are numbered at 1 to 55, and I believe there was a request to include a further delegation to entitle the head of planning to resolve or amend where necessary.
Excuse me. Sorry, I'm slightly confused, Chair. I made two proposals and they're not being looked at. I'm a little bit confused as to why we are going ahead with the decision without considering the two proposals I made.
Your suggestions were not seconded, Councillor Curry.
We've moved on.
They weren't seconded at the time
You
that you
didn't
made
ask
them.
for a second,
You
Chair.
didn't. I'm happy to second.
Councillors, Councillor Curry, I said to you that should I would discourage deferral, but should the suggestion of the 106 powers be taken up to come back, I didn't have an issue with that. The Vice Chairman is moving the recommendation. Would you like to include in it the fact that the details of the 106 agreement should be referred back to committee in due course?
if there is general support for that, I'm happy to include that.
Apologies, Chair. I am still very confused. I made a proposal that we defer, and you didn't ask for a second, but I understand there is a second. Is that not on the table?
Quite often people will put their hand straight up, but nobody did.
Okay. But if we have a second, would it be considered by members, or is that not how this works?
Right? Would you like to put your deferral motion?
Yes, please.
Seconded? Those in favour?
That's 6, Chairman.
Those to the contrary?
That's 7, Chairman.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, with your concurrence on that basis, I reassert the previous proposal with the proviso of the report back on the 106.
Chairman, just to add to what Councillor Buckwalter said, there's 2 extra conditions that Mr Hawkins referred to, which were on the additional supplementary circulator.
Oh, okay, yes. So I would include the 2 additional conditions.
Yeah. Is that second? Those in favour? Those to the contrary?
That's 7, Chair.
Those to the contrary?
That's 6, Chairman.
Thank you. The application for Kingsnorth Power Station succeeds. Councillor Fenn, would you like to join us? Can I ask you if you have any declarations? Okay. Members will be aware that Bardell Wharf has been deferred, and that takes us then to agenda item.
Page 93, Chair.
Yeah, and agenda item 6, and that's going to be presented by Hannah.
Good evening. This application comes back to you after being reported at the last committee. It's been brought back for 2 reasons. Firstly, it was to amend the report in order to incorporate the parish council representations, and secondly, members will see that there's an additional landscaping condition being added. I will run through, it's only a very brief presentation, I'll run through it quickly on the basis that there were some members that weren't in attendance last month. So this is an application for retrospective consent for the change of use from equestrian land to the extension to the existing approved overflow car park. This is the area of the car park that is requiring consent. The previous consent from 2019 consented to use the adjacent space on this side as overflow car parking. This aerial photo just shows the site as a whole, incorporating both the approved and the application site. Just to note, as you can probably see in this aerial photo, that since the original application was approved, the entire area has actually always been adopted for the overall parking use. So this shows where the fence line between the 2 areas should have been. And I'll just take the opportunity just to point out Bellwood Court as a residential area here, and these 2 neighbours specifically, numbers 2 and 3, I believe. Some photographs here just showing the extent of the field on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side it just shows the extent of the boundary between the fence line and the boundary. There's fencing and hedging here at the rear of 2 and 3 Bellwood Court, and this is just a further photograph within the site towards the end subject of the application. Just to summarise, this is a retrospective application to be used as overflow parking in relation to the Fenn pub and zoo. The purpose of extending the car park area is to ensure that the road remains unobstructed and to ensure that visitors have somewhere responsible to park that ensures that inappropriate parking in the surrounding areas does not occur. The application is recommended for approval subject to conditions, which now has the additional condition that's been added since it was in front of members last month. Thank you.
Thank you. Any member? No. Vice Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. Members, I move the recommendation set out for agenda item 6, that being approval, noting that we have that additional condition there concerning landscape, etc. So I move approval subject to conditions 1 to 4. So moved.
Is that seconded? Thank you. Those in favour?
That's 15, Chairman.
Thank you. The application for land south of Fenn Corner is approved. That takes us then to agenda item 8, which is Tudor Farm, part of Court Lodge Farm, Stoke Road, and that's Kemi.
Thank you, Chairman. This application in a simplest form just seeks to allow the permanent stationing of caravans which are being proposed to accommodate seasoned workers on the farm. So that is the site there. That's just a area view, a site location plan just showing the site in there. And this is the existing layout, and that is what is on the site. So there is an application that's been granted on the lawful development certificate to position 26 caravans on the site to house seasonal workers between March and November, which is the harvesting period. So the proposal is mainly logistical reasons to be able to keep the caravans on site. They will not be accommodated during the period that they're not harvesting. However, this would deal with logistics issues of having to remove the caravans from site when the season ends in November and then bring them back again just before they start again in March. So this application just seeks to retain those caravans on site and deal with the logistics issues, which also results in sustainability matters in terms of carrying them out and bringing them back again. So in terms of design, amenity, highways considerations, those have been fully addressed in the officer's report to committee, and officers request members to consider our recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think that's an eminently good suggestion. I think that the transporting them off and back every 6 months or so, it'd probably do more harm to the environment than they're actually doing just standing there empty for 6 months. So I think we should just approve this personally, and I will be.
I don't have any other member, so I move to the Vice Chairman. Oh, Councillor Lammer.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. In terms of security of the site, if they're going to be left there, is this site secure, or would they be subject to vandalism if left vacant for 6 months at a time? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. It is our understanding that once the seasonal workers are no longer on site, the caravans are vacant, and it will be the responsibility of the farm or the agricultural owners to ensure that they're secured. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, is there any proviso in this that that security detail is undertaken by the site owner so that they don't get subject to vandalism and nuisance during the off-season? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. We haven't recommended a condition for that, but if it's the committee's wish to do that, we could incorporate that to seek a management plan on how that will be secured when the workers are no longer on site and before the next season starts again. Thank you, Chairman.
I don't have anybody else who's indicated, so I'll move to the Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. If I may just comment, I know this area extremely well. This is pretty well the border between Who Parish Council and Stoke Parish Council. Stoke Parish Council have commented that they do not object, and as most members will be aware from papers, it's quite unusual to have parish councils not objecting, especially to somewhat unusual applications. So I think we should give weight to the fact that Stoke, as the parish or the adjoining parish, do not object. I actually went and looked at the site today, and it's very neatly positioned. You can only just see the roofs of the mobile units from, if you're driving along Stoke Road, heading down past North Street to Polly Adams Cottage, which is the last property in Who. And I really can see no reason other than to take a similar view to Stoke Parish Council and go with approval. So I recommend approval, Madam Chairman, subject to the conditions set out as they are, that is numbers 1 to 4. So moved.
Is that seconded? Okay. Those in favour?
Chairman, there was just a question of that Councillor Lammas raised regarding that additional condition.
I did not include that.
Right, okay. I was just checking. Sorry, Chairman.
That's 14, Chair. Sorry, 14.
Those to the contrary? Okay.
None.
The application for Tudor Farm is approved. That takes us to land off of 143 Berengrave Lane. I think that's Hannah.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for the construction of 8 residential dwellings comprising 4 3-bed and 4 4-bed, with some detached garages, private amenity space, landscaping and associated parking. So the red line plan here showing the application site, and as we can see, this includes the access off Berengrave Lane, which is now known as Queen's Court Close. The aerial photograph just helps to put the site in context. I just should note at this point the access coming through here, I think. Yeah, coming through here. And the adjacent site, which is here, is actually now developed, consisting of 9 units of accommodation, and is actually now in occupation, and it was only completed in the last couple of months, so it doesn't show up on the aerial photographs as they are not current enough. So photograph here showing access into the site through Queen's Court Close, sorry. And the 2 properties at the front, which are fronting Berengrave Lane, numbers 143 and 145. This photograph's taken within the site, and it shows the newly completed properties in Queen's Court. So just one's from sort of the access road, and one is further in, looking towards the right-hand side, which is where the access to the application site will be. These 2 photographs here show the point of access into the application site. It's just a longer view, and then a closer view here showing where the access will be adjacent to the existing completed property. This, again, is just looking at the map, we can see that it's taken across the application site. And just to point out, there are some roofs over here, which is the new development, newish development, Nuthatch Place, and slightly over to the left you can see roofs, which are properties on Lower Rainham Road. This application is, if you are standing at the access gate into the site and looking right, so back towards properties on Berengrave Lane, and you can just see sort of the side fence there of the new property adjacent to the site. And looking the other way, looking left, further out towards the existing fields, with Lower Rainham Road the other side of the hedging. Okay, so there's an application set out in the property history. This was the previous refusal in 2020. Slide just showing the proposed scheme that was refused. I think what we need to note here is obviously this application site for Queen's Court here, although had been approved at the time, had not started construction and was not built. What this application does, as you'll see through the plan, it sort of fills in this area now. This particular proposal was for 4 larger detached properties, and the reason for refusal previously was that it was seen as an encroachment into the countryside. Now turning to the proposed plan ahead of us. Again, using the same access point as the previous application, we now have an application for 4 detached houses shown here as plots 1, 2, 3 and 8. Oops, how do you go the other way? There, sorry. And then 4 semi-detached houses here, plots 4 to 7. All the detached units have garaging shown. This one is adjoined to the property, and the other detached units have detached garages. These detached properties are all the 4-bed and all have the car parking spaces, the garage spaces, and 2 additional on off-road parking spaces. The 4 semi-detached properties have 2 off-road parking spaces each. I'll go through some elevations and floor plan layouts. So plot 1, I will move around, is one of the 4-bed properties. This is the property with the attached garage. Plots 2 and 3, again 4-bed properties. These do have a detached garage. There's a plan come in. The semi-detached properties through plots 4 through to 7. And the final plot, which is plot 8. And then this shows the garages that would be provided on plots 2, 3 and 8. I think probably to note is the design of these properties and the scale of these properties in relation to the existing development that's now adjacent in Queen's Court Close. And the developers have provided a CGI, again showing the design to be very akin to the adjacent development, and here we can see the detached properties with the parking. So, in summary, given the development of the adjacent site that's now taken place, and the fact that the proposal is considerably much more of an infill, bringing that building line across, rather than a standalone intrusion into the countryside, along with the need to consider this application in the planning balance, taking into account the council's current housing need, the proposal has been considered by officers as acceptable, and therefore there's a recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't hear you,
put
Chair.
this on.
Sorry. Thank you for the presentation, and I'm intrigued with the logic behind allowing this, and from what I see of the little development itself, it looks quite attractive and it fits in and so on and so forth. And the reason that we declined on a previous occasion was apparently because it was encroaching into countryside. And now, because of the other development that's now completed, it's now not considered to be encroaching into countryside. I'm just looking at a Google view, satellite view of that area. And I'd like to understand, before reaching a decision on this, at what point how do we decide what is encroachment into countryside and what is not? Because now this piece of land is developed. Now, is there another little piece that's somewhere along that part of Berengrave Lane or in that general vicinity then gets developed as well? I just want to get my head around how this works. I realise we look at each case on its merits, but are we putting more land at risk of development that we would otherwise not have developed because of this little few extra houses? I hope I'm making that clear. I don't know if I could have a little bit of explanation to help me with that principle. Thank you.
Chairman, thank you very much. I think the first thing I would like to do in response to that is say the previous application was recommended for approval by officers. It was then overturned by the committee in terms of the encroachment. So officers have been consistent here in terms of the application. Hannah's very helpfully held up or put up this slide. Can I borrow the mouse? Sorry, Hannah. And officers' view at that time was, with this site being developed in here, what this leaves is just a little finger of development which couldn't be economically farmed, and therefore this would help to round off this section here. That was our view before, and that's our view now. And we feel that we can still properly defend, and we have done with the pump farm decision, the land to the west here. So hopefully that's helpful, Councillor Tranter.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's exactly what I wanted to understand, and I'm grateful for you explaining it, because it's an important point of principle. I know we're always grappling with it, and we're never quite sure where the line is, so thank you very much. Thank you.
Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that explanation, Ms Harris, because that's quite helpful, because my question was kind of on a similar vein as to Councillor Tranter's. But I am concerned here because you pointed out that obviously you could defend the land to the sort of west of the site, but what about the land to the north? Because that looks like there might even be another line drawn and another estate goes in next to the north side of there. And I think we're struggling here over the designation of the area of local landscape importance and the purpose of it, because I think this kind of makes that policy redundant almost in the sense that it is encroachment into the countryside. The area is protected under a policy, a not particularly strong policy, but nevertheless it carries weight. And it's sort of being chipped away at. And there will become a point, I suspect, in a few months' time or a year's time, when members will feel they've got to draw the line somewhere, as has happened in Rainham, previous decisions a few weeks ago, where there was quite a significant, strong opinion against development further out towards Sittingbourne along the A2 for various reasons. I'm also concerned, obviously, about the impact on Berengrave Lane. The road there is very narrow, struggling with traffic as we speak, if you like, and this actually adds just a little bit more pressure to that. So I've got a number of concerns about this development in terms of the fact that the area is protected, it's green space, it's a greenfield site, it's protected, and yet it's being nibbled away at gradually, and there seems to be there will come a point where we draw the line, and if it's today or if it's a year from now, I'm not sure. So I can't support this development. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. So I know this site very well. It's in my ward. I recall the original application, which has now been developed on what was the former very small nursery there. That was justified by planning officers originally because the development was within the curtilage of the nursery itself. Members, in my view, quite rightly, rejected a very similar proposal 2 years ago to what we see tonight on the basis that it went beyond the curtilage of that nursery, and it went in and started eroding the land around that nursery site. And the concerns were, 2 years ago, about where we draw the line and how much of that Lower Rainham farmland area, which stretches all the way from Berengrave all the way through to Ito Way, how much of that gets nibbled away at. And in terms of my view on these things, I was someone who opposed the development at Blaw's Farm and Pump Farm very, very strongly. That's further along the Lower Rainham Road. But when it came to that appeal decision, they looked at that wider corridor as a whole. So I think it is quite right that members are concerned about these smaller developments that nibble away at it. And members have said, where do we draw the line? In my view, where we drew the line 2 years ago was the right place to draw the line. Because if you allow this development, we'll have another application come in that will hook a left and go into the rest of that field and all the ones around it, and you start then losing more and more of that Lower Rainham farmland area. You then lose that sort of strategic green countryside buffer that at the moment has been defended very strongly with that appeal decision at Blaw's Farm and Pump Farms. That's what the concern is. I think we were right 2 years ago. That refusal on page 160, nothing has changed in my view. As I said, this site the site that's been developed already had permission. There was all of the context around the decision with regard to the local plan, the housing delivery test. Nothing has changed with that regard. We drew the line at that within the curtilage of that nursery site and said, not going beyond that. We're going to protect that Lower Rainham farmland. In my view, we should do the same tonight. So I won't support the application.
Councillor Holcroft-Scott.
Yeah, I'm embracing all that's been said this evening, really. I cannot offer this development my support. As a primary school teacher, there's a book called Dinosaurs and All That Rubbish, and it talks about green space, little bits of piecemeal developments just gobbling it all up. And that's what's going to happen here if we're not careful. Plus, the infrastructure in terms of the road is just absolutely inadequate, for these luxury dwellings to keep being given planning permission. So I'm against.
Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you. I wonder if you could put the proposed block plan slide up, please. Yeah, thank you. I have a concern that it looks as though, from the drawing that I'm looking at, that the property in the left-hand bottom corner of the frontage ends along the road, and there's left a little bit that probably still going to be held by the developers to extend that close even further into the field beyond. If that piece of land was included in the house and there was no way of getting to the field beyond, I'd be happy to support it. If not, I wouldn't. So can you clarify whether the road could be extended in the future?
Chairman, it's a good question. And members have rightly raised issues over area local landscape importance, and it is. But to meet our housing needs, some greenfield sites do need to be released. The question is, and that will include areas of local landscape importance, and indeed some have been granted consent for those. It then comes down to just how value this aspect is. And members previously took a view on that, and you will take a view tonight. In answer to Councillor Hackwell's question, which is a good one, if you look at the existing site in here and what happened, and then you look at I think that's the point you're saying, that's exactly the same as this. The previous application showed how that could be cut off, and that's what you're saying. Is if it was something more akin to that, you may support it, but your concern, reflecting also other comments from members, is that this gives you I'm putting words in your mouth, but you're not happy because of that. That would, the concern that Councillor Curry and others have said that might then continue that piecemeal development.
I have to say, when I saw the pictures of the development so far and saw exactly how the access to the other piece of land was there for everybody to see, I immediately looked at this one and came to the conclusion it's going to be exactly the same thing. Councillor Hubbard.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at Google Maps, and it's still showing the previous use of the site, which is a nursery, e.g. a brownfield site. So, yep, no problem with the housing that went on the brownfield site, but here is taking it into the green environment, and to me it is starting to nibble in, and it could go further. So I really have concerns about this application.
I mean, I just contribute to this in the sense that, yes, it was a larger site when we considered it previously, and we decided to go with a reduced scheme. I think that the concern that I would have with this is not so much the principle, but the way that it is laid out to prevent incursion into that further zone. So that's my concern. I have to move to the Vice Chairman because I have nothing else.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I move the recommendation as set out from page 153. That is approval subject to conditions which are numbered 1 to 16. I so move.
Is that seconded? Those in favour?
Oh, sorry, that's 4, Chairman.
Those to the contrary?
That's 11, Chairman.
Can I, rather than going straight for a refusal, just canvass the suggestion that I'm not sure whether members are in principle opposed to building on this site or if they're concerned about the access to further land. So the options are that it is refused, or the option is that it could be deferred for discussion with the applicants as to where that house is, where those houses are. They're the options. Would you prefer me to go? Would you prefer it that way?
I think there's no point in for a deferral of the principal chairman. So I prefer someone to either move deferral because the principal's accepted or move refusal.
Okay. I'm going to suggest that this application is deferred for negotiation. It may well be that whatever comes back is not acceptable. It isn't prejudicing that. If you're not happy with that, then would somebody like to move something?
Sorry. I think we could go along with the refusal and they could come back with a slightly different amended scheme. Okay. So it would send a strong signal that we don't like what we're seeing.
So,
an amended scheme might be acceptable.
So could I gather from members their reasons for refusal? Councillor Potter.
Well, I think we have very good wording for refusal on page 160, so which relates to the refusal decision 2 years ago, which, as I said, the principle here is the same in my view. In terms of that also included a highways refusal. So I don't know if Melvin wanted to comment.
See, Madam Chair, I think it'd be difficult to refuse you on highways. In terms of the design complies with your current design standard, and it also complies with Manual for Streets design standards as well. So I'd find it very difficult to sustain an objection or indeed refuse this application on highway grounds. Thank you.
I would suggest the strength of the refusal lies in the landscape impact and the principal development beyond the brownfield site. So that would be my main reason for refusal. And I'm happy to move that with wording to be agreed, final wording to be agreed.
Does that proposal by Councillor Potter find a seconder? Yeah, okay.
Chairman, if it helps the minutes, I think, forgive me, Martin, you're effectively saying the wording is, proposed development would result in intrusion of built form into the countryside and erosion of openness detrimental to the landscape value of the area of local landscape importance, contrary to policies BNE 25 and BNE 34 of the Medway Local Plan 2003 and paragraph 170 of the MPPF.
Right. That is duly proposed and seconded. Those in favour?
That's 12, Chairman.
Those to the contrary?
That's 1, Chairman.
Thank you. The application for 143 Berengrave Lane is refused. That takes us then to land at the rear of Fenn House Farm, Fenn Street. That's going to be with Dave.
Chairman, thank you very much. Members, firstly, the application recommendation should include the recommendation for a Section 106 agreement, as that's referred to in the report, and that's to secure the development being for self-build. So it'll be the recommendation Section 106 to secure self-build, and then the conditions as set out. So members, we're back to a site that you, or close to a site that you considered earlier in this committee. So you considered this site over here before in relation to the Hannah's application for car parking. So the character of this area is you've got frontage development just in here. You've then got an industrial development through here, and then you've got the zoo and a residential development just in there with that overflow car park. Just in here is 2 new properties which have just been constructed, and then we've got an extension currently being undertaken to this site here. So this is an aerial photograph, so you can see the trees just in here. This is some stables in here, and this is equestrian use just in there. This is a field, and I'll show you some photographs of it in a moment, with an agricultural building just in there, access coming through here. And again, you can see that character of the area that I was referring to. That's the proposed vehicular access. Those are the 2 new properties just been completed, and you can see the building going on just next door there. This is looking back down that access, so that's from that viewpoint here, so within the application site looking back. Note the red car there, because that will be shown in other photos shortly. And then you can see these trees which are on the access. So we're actually at that point with the red car looking back into the site. So this is the field of that is the application site. That's the agricultural building I was referring to. That's the trees of the adjacent field that I was referring to. And then we're right in the far corner, slowly looking back at the agricultural building just there, and then back towards the red car just there. And then further along the site, looking back into it, so again you can see the trees, the adjacent site just there, and then again looking back towards that red car and the access just there. This is the illustrative block plan, because it's an outline application with all matters reserved for the construction of 4 self-built dwellings with associated parking and amenity space. Application was previously refused by officers, as you will see in the planning history section. So it was refused in April 2021. So what has changed since then to mean that officers are now recommending approval to it? What has changed effectively has been the appeal decision on Lower Rainham Road for self-built properties there, where the inspector with those attached weight not only to the fact that we need housing, so he attached significant weight to that, but also gave weight to the fact that there was self-build and there's a need for self-build in Medway. So we've reassessed this application with this illustrative plan, with the way it's laid out, or potentially laid out there, with a significant amount of landscaping around it. That's a 4-metre buffer around these most sensitive areas here. And then we've got the treed area in there, which help to limit the visual impact of the scheme. In terms of sustainability, we're cognizant of the approval that's been granted for the Hollies, which brings with it an improved bus service, and that development has commenced. So that will assist this, and then it will also help with the Bradfield's garage, which is in a short distance away, where there are the ability to buy some local top-up shopping there. So it'll help with that. So that is why, Chairman, we've changed the recommendation for one of refusal in terms of encroachment to one of approval now, but it is subject to it being for self-build and dealing with that need, hence the Section 106, and hence some of the conditions set out. On that basis, Chairman, we're recommending approval. Thank you.
Councillor Buckner.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. A little more to the history, if I may, from my local knowledge. If colleagues look at the Ordnance Survey extract at page 170, you will see to the east, across the road, you will see Bellwood Court. Now, Bellwood Court was developed in the very late 80s, originally as 7 units. Then plot number 1, as you go in on the left, was subdivided. It's now number 1A. There are 8 units. Some of those were self-build units, and they were on absolute a mix of greenfield and brownfield. There was an old World War II, I'm not sure what it was called, but there was an old installation from World War II that was there. So some of those units I know, because professionally I was involved as a lawyer in some of those a long time ago, 30 years ago. They were self-built. So there is some self-build history in the locality. And if you look in Fenn, it says Fenn Street there, Fenn Farm. There's been a barn built there now. There is Fenn Barn that doesn't show as a named property. So there has been some recent development in, relatively recent development, I should say, in this area. And we've seen the 2 cottages that have been built at the front there on Fenn Street as well. We always need to be very sensitive about development in our small villages. And I think of St Maryhill and Cooling on a parallel. There are 2 smallest parishes in terms of residences and residents, and therefore sensitivity is important. However, what doesn't show up on the photographs is also the opposite, just to the south of the Fenn Street Woods, the south of the zoo, as it were, there is also really an industrial section there, where the word street is on Fenn Street. There are commercial premises there, quite large commercial premises now. So there is a mix of different usages in this area. And I do think also that with our tiniest villages, there is a factor of sustainability that we should bear in mind. In other words, maybe it supports the character of a village, that it remains sustainable by having sufficient properties. Quite frankly, look at what's happened at Stoke. We've had no due development at Stoke for many years, and now the school has gone. So my final point, Madam Chairman, is that the reality of planning is that we have to learn from the planning law and the planning decisions. And the Lower Rainham Road decision about self-build, I think, ought to influence us in our approach to self-build. And there are extracts in the report, quite rightly here, from what was said about self-build. And I therefore fully understand why there's been an officer change of view on this, because of the self-build element here. So I think this is one of those decisions on balance, but I think the officers have come to the right conclusion for the recommendation.
Before I ask you to move the recommendation.
Chairman, thank you. There was one thing I forgot to mention. I would also like to change the wording of condition 21. Condition 21, which is the energy efficiency and climate change. I think it's highly possible that if this development is allowed and the houses come forward, that they could do better than what's set out in the Baron Edwards report. So I'd like to change the wording of that so it says that they have to submit details of how they're going to deal with energy efficiency and climate change, which as a minimum would meet that set out by Baron Edwards. So it gives them the opportunity to do something better. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think it's very fine distinctions here. We're on a very fine margins as to whether this is acceptable or not. And I appreciate Councillor Buckwell's comments there, but he did use the word village, and I've never seen Fenn Street, and obviously I know this area quite well myself, as a village. And I suspect that it's becoming one by default, very gradually. Sorry? Yes, exactly. So I think that we are on a very fine margin as to what would be acceptable to change the character of this area. And my own feeling is that this is similar to the previous application we've just discussed. It's encroachment into the countryside, it's backfill, whatever you want to call it. It's not quite, I think we're asking too much here at the moment. Maybe one property might have been a suitable thing, but this is 4. And my concern, again, as was mentioned at the last application, would be that the next field over, there'll be 4 more. And I think we have to be very careful about how we define what we think the character of Fenn Street is within the context of this proposal. So I am concerned. I appreciate your point on the environmental efficiency of the buildings. I was going to raise that, but that's been dealt with, so thank you for that. But so I'm minded at the moment, maybe it's further discussion, not to support this. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Hubbard.
Thank you. Fenn Street, in fact, the properties which have been built either side of the trackway. For years, myself and our late colleague Peter Hicks used to say that we had a problem with the old local plan. It was the fact that it failed to recognise where you could develop within a hamlet area. So I quite agree that we missed a trick back when we were talking about the previous plan, where we drew envelopes around the larger villages but failed to draw them around smaller hamlets, which is what I would describe Fenn Street as. I think having an envelope around that area would actually give them some guidance to how we would feel about the area now. And I concur with Councillor Curry. I think it's very similar to the previous application, where we're starting to intrude into the greenery of the peninsula here. And I can see it, maybe slightly moving across along Newlands Farm Road as well. So I can't support it simply because I think it's encroaching onto the countryside. Thank you.
Councillor Hawcroft-Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, when is a village not a village? And also the roads, the transport, the noise. You know, there were really minor roads there. And at the end of the day, it really alludes to what we've just turned down in Rainham, in my opinion.
Councillor Tranter.
Well, thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, I take a contrary view to some of my colleagues. I will be supporting the application. I think self-build is a wonderful thing to do, and these will be people that will choose a little piece of land in this hamlet, or whatever you want to call it, to make it home, which is largely how these places grew in the first place. I think it's in the spirit of what's going on there. This is not some big developer coming in and changing the whole character of it. I'm grateful for Mr. Harris's suggestions about, trying to get the quality as high as we possibly can. I don't think it's, in this particular incident, given the nature of this, is setting any precedents. I don't think it's going to significantly change the character, and we desperately need housing. We need housing, and there will be places that need to be built upon. So I will be supporting the application. Thank you.
Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chair. I was very disappointed with the Lower Rainham Road decision. That was and is a very sensitive area backing onto the country park. Although what I would say with that proposal was that it did front the highway and did sort of complete the hamlet, if you like, that was there. Whereas what is proposed here is backland development, going in behind the existing ribbon of development along the Ratcliffe highway. And the cynic in me says, well, if inspectors are likely to approve applications that they wouldn't otherwise because they are self-builds, what then stops an applicant getting the principle of development approved by initially stating it's a self-build proposal and then coming forwards and developing it as they would any other development? What protection, what safeguard is there in place?
Chairman, I understand totally the question. It's a good question, and it's one which certainly exercised me with the Lower Rainham Road appeal decision. I think what we're saying here, through the Section 106, through the conditions, is that the exception here is that it's self-built, which makes it is a reason for justifying this application as opposed to a house builder coming in and building four houses. And it links also to Councillor Tranter's point about the fact that we not only have a housing need, but we also have a register that we're required by legislation to keep of self-builders. And we've got a duty and requirement to meet that self-build need as well under current legislation. So I understand your point, but I feel that we can defend, if members were to go approval, I think we can defend, if there was an application coming in for normal build, I think we can defend a refusal on that, but at the same time justify this approval.
I don't have anybody else who has indicated, so I'll move to the Vice Chairman to move the recommendation.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I hope you'll permit me to say I don't think St Mary Hoo Parish Council will be very happy to think that their parish includes a separate hamlet of Fenn Street. Fenn Street is the sub-name of the Ratcliffe Highway. It's the only street nameplate in Medway on that roundabout there that actually has two road names, one on top of the other. So Fenn Street is not a separate place. It is part of St Mary Hoo. I think they would say that also quite strongly. So, Madam Chairman, members, I do move the recommendation at page 171. That is with an amendment. Also, in addition to conditions 1 to 25, with condition 21 amended, as Mr. Harris outlined, but subject additionally to a Section 106 agreement being negotiated and concluded. On that basis, I so move.
Is that seconded? Those in favour?
That's 8, Chairman.
Thank you. Those to the contrary?
That's 7, Chairman.
Thank you. The land at the rear of Fenn House is approved. I would suggest, members, that we have a very brief pause there. Could I ask you, please, not to disappear off for 10 or 15 minutes, but could we make it 5? We then move on to agenda item 11, which is 421 Walderslade Road, and in this instance, Councillor Gulvin wishes to address you as the ward member. Councillor Gulvin. We are on 421 Walderslade Road, in which Councillor Gulvin wishes to address you. Do you agree? Right. We have a new face with us this evening. That's Hannah Rusbridge. Welcome. And she's going to present this item.
Good evening, everyone. So this is the application for 421 Walderslade Road, which is an application for 18 flats comprising 9 one-bed flats and 9 two-bed flats with cycle and bin storage proposed as well. Just before I begin the presentation, I'd just like to draw your attention to the items on the supplementary, which is asking for a resolution to grant approval, awaiting a response from the Environment Agency. It's worth noting that there is the approval on the neighbouring site, which they did not object to or provide comments for. So we're not necessarily expecting, but we've given them the necessary consultation time. In addition, a petition has been submitted with 55 signatures, and there is also an additional Section 106 contribution for youth provision in the Chatham area. So moving on to the proposal. This is the site plan. So the application site outlined in red. A lot of you will be aware of the neighbouring site 419 Walderslade, which has been given approval for a very similar development, which is 18 flats. Just to put it into context, we have the co-op here, the other shops of Walderslade Village, residential flats here, and then residential all along here, and Dargetswood here. Again, to put it in a bit more context with an aerial shot, Walderslade Village, the neighbouring site, application site, and there's a public footpath running adjacent up here. A few photos of the application site. So the application site is, these hoardings here are for 419, so the application site is just behind here. This is looking directly facing the application site, so there's an existing bungalow here. And looking towards Walderslade Village with the application site around this tree here, and looking towards the site from Walderslade Village shops with the application site here. This is the existing bungalow on site, so just running through a few photos, the aerial shot here, which has been given prior notification consent for its demolition. The existing site plan showing the bungalow, and the existing section showing the topography of the site here. So you can see it's a difficult topography to work with at lower level with Walderslade Road here. And then we have Rush Close up here. Again, with the existing street scene, just putting it into context, the properties at Rush Close are up this higher level here, existing bungalow here, consent given for 18 flats here, and the dentist at 417 Walderslade here, and a residential property at 423 Walderslade Road here. Showing the existing topography of the site, not too much to say on this one. This is the proposed site layout plan. So as we can see, similar to 419, it's a tiered development. So it's 5 stories from the front, 2 stories from the rear, angled to minimise any amenity issues. It's also worth noting that behind this site boundary, there is an area of land which is not included before you get to the boundary of Rush Close. Showing the proposed front and rear elevations, helpfully given by the developer in the context of the neighbouring development. So this is the application site here. So as we can see, 5 stories, ground floor parking, 4 stories of residential. And this is the neighbouring property at 423 Walderslade Road. There is an obscure glazed window here, providing for a non-habitable room. And as you can see, the ridge height does not go that much beyond the property here and matches the neighbouring development. And again, we can see Rush Close properties here. This shows the elevation from the rear, so you can see 2 stories, and that will be viewed from the properties at Rush Close. Showing the proposed side elevations. So this is the rear, this is the back of the application site, but consider there's another patch of land before you get to Rush Close. And from the front, so it's set back from Walderslade Road to allow for some landscaping. This one shows it a bit more clearly that there is amenity space to the rear. But from this space, they are, if you're looking up, that would be, you can see it from this photo slightly here, you would be looking into the fence of the properties at Rush Close and not into the rear gardens. Some proposed sections of the development. Moving on to the floor plans, we have access to the centre, and then there's a separate access for the refuse storage. All parking spaces are policy compliant, and the number of parking spaces are also policy compliant, providing some visitor spaces as well. There is a sliding gate access as well. Onto the floor plans, I'll just flick through these quickly. But there's, as I said earlier, 9 one-bed flats, 9 two-bed flats. All flats meet the national space standards and all have adequate outlook. What they've tried to do with the development is make sure that the windows are directional to reduce any overlooking to neighbouring properties, taking into consideration the block here as well. So as we get higher up, so 2nd, 3rd and 4th floor, the distance from the boundary moves further in. And 3rd floor, we introduce the roof terrace to the front and external amenity space to the rear. Again, directional windows to project that outlook towards the rear of the gardens of Walderslade Road and to minimise the overlooking to Rush Close. This again, stepped in again, 4th floor and the roof plan. Worth noting here, a green cedar roof is proposed, but access is for maintenance only, so cannot be used as an amenity area. These are a couple of images provided by the developer, which just shows the bulking and massing within the street scene. So taken from Walderslade Village, this is the application site, and this is the approved scheme at 419. And I don't know if you can see it too well on here, but we've got the maximum height taken from Darget's Wood. So we can see here, it's not that visible from Darget's Wood. Some proposed visualisations taken from Walderslade Village and looking down towards Walderslade Village. And then also helpfully provided is an image with 419 as well. So subject to the section 106, a verification report for climate change measures and conditions in relation to surface water drainage and ecological enhancement measures, it's recommended approval subject to the response from the Environment Agency, which has been set out on the supplementary. And we ask for delegated authority to add conditions in relation to any response from the Environment Agency. Therefore, the proposal is recommended for approval.
Thank you. Councillor Golvin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, members. This is a site I've probably known intimately for well over 60 years. 417 Walderslade Road was my mother's childhood home and the home of my grandmother until her death a few years ago. So I've seen that Walderslade Village change from just literally no more than a dozen properties excluding the old row of late Victorian cottages called Aurora cottages. It's changed out of all recognition in my lifetime. The principle of residential development on this land, I think, was probably established before the First World War, because the properties were bought by a family called Horlock, who came from Gravesend. All it had on it were 2 wooden shacks. The last of the wooden shacks was demolished in the last couple of years. That was 419 Walderslade Road. The bungalow at the back was a replacement for another wooden shack, because that's what Walderslade consisted of between the 2 world wars. Lots of little wooden shacks in the woods, and it grew out of that into the major development we see today. So I don't think one can argue that it shouldn't be used for residential development. Quite the reverse. That particular site has been in residential use for well over 100 years. What I do have a concern with, and it's a very strong concern of mine, is the scale and massing of that building in particular. And I think the CGI you've got in front of you doesn't really show it well enough, but that building sits on a hillside. It will tower over the whole of Walderslade village. At the moment, there's only 1 block of flats in Walderslade village. That is immediately opposite a building called Fontana, but that's down in the valley. It's in the bottom of the valley, and actually the bottom of the building sits below the level of Walderslade Road. So that's just slightly to the right of where you can see at the moment. So whilst it is a block of flats, it sits in the valley and is not conspicuous. That, I'm afraid, is going to be, I believe, too conspicuous. It will dominate the whole scene. What I would request you do as a committee is refuse that on the basis of the massing, but I would suggest that 4 floors would be perfectly acceptable. I think having 5 floors of accommodation is just 1 floor too much. That extra floor really does make that building stand out like a sore thumb. It will sort of dominate the whole area, which I don't think is right, because the majority of the developments are quite low to scale. The shops which are just to the left of this, which in my childhood was an orchard, that's only 2 stories high. So it fits into the valley. The co-op and the shops around it, again, while they're quite tall, but they're in the bottom of the valley. They don't dominate the street scene. I'm afraid these 2 buildings will dominate, and this proposal being further, just slightly further up the hillside, that gives it more prominence into the area. And whilst it sounds a lot too high, only being 2 stories at the back, I believe it will result in overlooking over the existing development of Rush Close. If you take that top story floor off, I think it would resolve the vast majority of the problems. So I'd like you to please members to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, members, Councillor Lamas.
Thank you, Chair. Like the local ward councillor, this is an area that I do know intimately well. Has my local dry cleaners there, my local Chinese takeaway, my former favourite Indian restaurant. And it's just an area I know very well. I've been going there pretty much my whole life. I share some of the concerns that were so eloquently put by their very able and well-represented local ward councillor here this evening. My concerns are mainly about the topography of the land and the height of the elevation and how it will be viewed from Rush Close. Members need to be really sort of aware with this application that whilst all the images show it from the Walderslade Road end, you actually need to consider it just as equally from the Rush Close end. So from the Walderslade Road end, it is a commercial area. There are some flats in the trough of the valley, almost directly opposite, slightly to the left of this area. So some flats down that level, you can kind of see how it's going that way. But when you then poke the elevation up too high towards the top of the hill on the Rush Close, you're really changing the view and the landscape of all of the residents that live there in settled housing at a settled height. So, and I also noted that this application concerns have been raised by our local MP, Tracy Crouch. So I have a few concerns. I'd like reassurances. The first one is on parking. This is not near local train stations or anything like that. Pretty much whoever's going to live there, if they're going to do anything, they're going to have to drive. So I want to make sure that there's adequate parking provisions for people that intend to live there, first of all. The second thing is about the height of the elevation. I too am in agreement with the local ward councillor that even though the elevation is proposed to be 5 on the Walderslade Road end, finishing off at 2 at the top end of the hill, I still think that is one too high. I would also suggest, I'll be voting against it this evening, but I also suggest if members were to defer or vote for it, whatever the circumstance, I would appreciate it if the head of plan could go back and suggest taking that story off so that you finish off with the one story at the back end. That combined with my third concern, which is trees, might do the trick. So this area with the current cottage there is almost camouflaged by mature trees. Now I'm aware from the reading that none of them have tree protection orders, but I would like assurances over these retained tree policies. I think I've read that there's like 5-year protection, and if they go, they have to be replanted. But I would like more assurances over retained trees and where these are. The reason being is that if you drop it by one level, keep the mature trees on the Walderslade Road ends, and especially the mature trees to the back end that look over Rush Close, those mature trees combined with a one-storey drop might remove a lot of the concerns, notwithstanding the construction phase and the noise that caused and the dust, but the prolonged concerns of the elevation, combined with retained trees, that might be absolutely crucial. The final concern I'd like comments on, please, Madam Chair, is about drainage. This is a very steep slope, and I am aware there's a flood risk in this area, and indeed I've witnessed localised flooding in this area. I want to know the Council's best assessment, beyond what's written here, about the impact on drainage, because of the steepness of the slope, and because it is so leafy and so green, as councillors will be aware, it slows the flow of water down and absorbs it. I think development like this would significantly increase the risk of flash flooding and localised flooding in the event of extreme weather events. And as we know, as climate change increases the frequency and severity of hydrometeorological phenomena, we need to make sure that we build in our future planning resilience to flash flooding. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Curry.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think my take on this, I think generally I'm getting the feel from the comments so far that the principle of developing this site isn't really an issue. It's what kind of development is taking place there. And I'm looking at it probably in a similar way to Councillor Lammers in terms of its sustainability, if you like. I mean, this is a location that's close to shops. There are bus services in and out, quite frequent bus services in this part of Medway, and I think in terms of sustainability, there's a lot going for it in that respect. It would be nice to see in the conditions more to do. Is it possible to have heat pumps there, or even a green roof, perhaps? I mean, I don't know if those things were discussed with the developer, and perhaps it might be possible to go back to them and ask that question if this were approved tonight. And in terms of the height. I mean, I would like to know, and I'd be grateful if there is an image showing the line of the rooftops there, because the block next to it, and I think the photograph that was up seemed to indicate that the line was, was consistent across the top there with the neighbouring properties. So it's not really intruding too much on the roofscape. And bearing in mind how tall we are building in Chatham at the moment, and that is really tall, I mean, this is quite sort of conservative, I think, in that respect. The 106 agreement is a good one with a good contribution towards the open spaces and such like as well. And I'd be concerned that the viability might be affected for those, of the actual construction if a floor were removed. And that would compromise the viability of the development. So my gut reaction here is to support this application. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you, Chair. As with all proposals, I try and think, well, what would happen if we rejected it? Will we likely to win this on appeal? Or would the developer likely to win it on appeal, I should say? And I think if we look at the planning history, next door has almost got an identical building that's already been given planning permission, identical sort of size and shape. And I think that if we tried to defend a refusal of this, we would come unstuck. We haven't got a local plan. We've gone back to Regulation 18. We haven't got a 5-year land supply. We're not building enough houses, or homes. I know we've built the most homes we've ever built in the last year, but we're still, according to the government, not building enough homes. So I think we would find it very difficult to defend a refusal of this. So I will be supporting this tonight.
Councillor Tranter.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I also have known the site for a long time and can go back 60 years for this site, but it was a village then. It's certainly not now. A little while ago with one of the other applications, I went out there and walked around because the levels are so different and changeable there. You have to understand the levels to understand some of these sites, and I think you can only do that if you visit. I have to say, having seen the proposals and having walked around and bearing in mind exactly what my colleague Councillor Hackwell has just said, I believe this will work. I'm going to support the application because I don't think, taking into account the character, the levels, the site and everything else, I haven't heard any compelling reason to reject it, especially bearing in mind we do need housing. I think, in actual fact, after a little while, it will fit in quite nicely with the surrounding areas, and I hope people will enjoy living there. So I will be, I'm afraid, supporting this application this evening. Yeah.
Councillor Potter.
Yes, thank you, Chair. If we could bring the slide up entitled CGI of 419 and 421 Walderslade Road, please. So it shows that street frontage there, lots of trees and bushes and what have you. But when you look at the street view of that section of the road there, it doesn't seem to have those species of trees or any such like. So it may well look like that in future years, but I imagine at least sort of 10, 15 years. But I think that's actually quite misleading in terms of what it's going to look like when it's finished. Now, unless I'm wrong and they're retaining something that you can't see from the roadside, but I do get fed up with seeing these CGIs, which are going to look nothing like what we are presented with, certainly not for many years. We see the same with sort of green roofs and things like that quite often then don't materialise. I wasn't a fan of 419, but I think it was the straw that broke the camel's back, and I don't think we'd have a leg to stand on in terms of a refusal of 421. I would like to see as many trees retained as possible to sort of break up the scale of the development and to give additional privacy and to be a bit of a sound buffer for those neighbours in Rush Close. But I think what we're presented with here is quite misleading in terms of these CGIs. Thank you.
So, Mr. Andrews, I think you wanted to come back on some issues.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just to answer a point regarding parking, I can confirm that the development provides parking compliant with our current standards. In fact, it's a maximum standard, so I'm happy with that. So it's compliant with policy T13. Thank you.
Right, back to the plan.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to come back on some of those points, so if we go back to the landscaping and tree issue, whilst we can't rely solely on soft landscaping to mitigate any amenity issues, obviously we do understand that it can help with any overlooking. So there is a condition relating to retained trees, which is a line of trees down this southern boundary here, and 3 trees to the rear. So that condition is in place. And there's also further landscaping conditions to secure any further landscaping, including the green roof, which they have proposed as part of an alteration to the proposal. That will be access for maintenance only, so residents won't have access to that. And there is also landscaping to the front. So it's set back at this point 6.5 metres from Walderslade Road, and at this point is 2 metres. So there's adequate space for some landscaping. Councillor Potter, I do understand your concerns. CGIs do often put the kind of best case scenario in place, but all we can do is have those conditions in place to control the landscaping and make sure that we are happy with anything that comes forward. Also worth noting, CGI is not an approved document, so we have to have those details of the landscaping. So if they come forward with trees that are of a bigger size and not young trees, so we can control the species, the kind of girth of the tree, and make sure that that's in place and that we're happy with that. In terms of parking, Melvin has addressed that. And drainage, there are conditions in place to ensure a construction surface water management plan has been put in place. So again, that's all secured via conditions. Thank you.
Councillor Thorne.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. It's regards to Section 106 money. And I'm just wondering whether, where you've got £12,788 going towards health improvement in Gillingham South and Medway, whether we could take into consideration Walderslade Health Centre or Medical Centre, should they require some assistance there.
I don't think I've got anybody else who's indicated, so I'll move to the Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thanks to Councillor Goldbin for speaking so well as ward member. It is my task to move the recommendation formally, which I do, and that is on the basis that there is no objection from the Environment Agency that there is a 106 agreement to which provisions are set out. There is an additional Roman numerals VI per the supplementary planning agenda.
Thanks, Councillor Buckwell. Just if the Environment Agency come back and say no objection subject to conditions, that you're happy for me to add those conditions?
Yes, because that would be in effect the basis on which they would not object. So I think we would have to accept those as drawn into the ultimate consent. But otherwise, subject to the 106 with the additional point from the supplementary planning agenda VI and conditions 1 to 20 as set out in section B.
Councillor Amos, I'm not opening the debate again.
No, it's just a point of clarity. Could I have some clarity? If the members were to vote to approve, would that mean that the officers are powerless to ask the planner to reduce one elevation? Or is it just like it's going to be 5 stories, that's it?
Chairman, I appreciate Councillor Lams's question. If members follow the recommendation and the proposal put forward by Councillor Buckwell, and that's approved, you're approving the plans as set out here. So if members want to see a reduction in height, they would need to either refuse or defer for further negotiation.
Right, I have that proposed by Councillor Buckwell. Is that seconded? Those in favour of the scheme which you have before you?
That's 12, Chairman.
Those to the contrary?
That's 2, Chairman.
The application for Rendina 421 Walderslade Road is approved. That takes us then to land to the east of Oakhurst Close in Walderslade, and again Councillor Buckwell wishes to address you. Do you agree?
Councillor Buck.
I think that. Sorry, who did I? My apologies.
I have no wish to address.
My apologies. Councillor Galvin, I'm sorry about that. Right, we're back with Hannah again.
Thank you, Chair. This is an outline application with all matters reserved apart from access for a detached 3-bed bungalow. This is the application site outlined in red. So we have Chestnut Avenue to the north here, Oakhurst Close here, and the surrounding area is residential. An aerial shot showing the parcel of land for the development here. It's worth noting on this one that the trees are not within the curtilage of the site. They are on a council-owned verge just outside the site. There's a bit of planning history to this site. So in 2010, there was an application for a similar application for a slightly bigger bungalow, which was refused for being out of context with its surroundings and significant erosion of the feel and sense of spaciousness in the locality. In 2019 and 2020, there are identical applications, but further information was submitted with this one. Again, for a 5-bed chalet bungalow on the same parcel of land. And it was refused on not having enough evidence to suggest that a no-dig access construction can be achieved on the site. And therefore, the harm to the health and vitality of the mature trees on the highway verge could not be demonstrated. Worth noting here as well, the trees are not protected by a tree preservation order, but they are of high amenity value. It's not considered that a TPO is necessary because it is on council-controlled land. So moving on to the current proposal, this is a photo looking from the junction of Chestnut Avenue. So we've got this property here, and this in here is the application site. And then we move on to the residential properties of Oakhurst Close. Some closer photos of the trees on the verge. So there's 7 mature trees along here. Again, the property facing onto Chestnut Avenue. Looking over the fence, this is a detached outbuilding for 45 Chestnut Avenue here. And looking towards Chestnut Avenue with the line of trees, with the application site here. The existing site plan and the proposed site plan. Now, as this is an outline application, the only matter for consideration is the access. So I have worked alongside the tree officer to try and get the details of this driveway. So they have now submitted details to demonstrate that a no-dig construction can be done, and they've proposed a metal grid material here and a cell web material here, which allows for the tree roots to breathe and reduces any harm to those trees, and then infilled with a loose pea shingle. It's noted in the report that although it is an outline application and appearance, scale and layout are reserved, that this siting of the dwelling is ideal in terms of minimising the harm on these trees. And I have spoken to the agents about that, but we do need to consider that it's outline, and therefore that can't be a matter for consideration for this application. These are some illustrative elevations, fairly simple bungalow. It's recommended that all permitted development rights are removed for extensions, roof extensions, outbuildings and hard standings, just to ensure that there's nothing done without assessing the impact on trees. And some illustrative floor plans. Here is an illustrative street scene, so existing, the mature trees to the front of the proposed development here, and then the bungalow sitting in here with the access going here. So part of that fence will be removed, but it's a very small part, and we would consider that minimal harm to the street scene. Also, just worth noting here that this is the side elevation of this property, and there are no windows. Therefore, we have recommended approval subject to a method statement for the removal of tree stumps, a method statement, an arboricultural statement, a tree protection plan, and a photographic method of the works, just to ensure all works are done in compliance with the details they've submitted. And it's recommended for approval. Thank you.
Councillor Galvin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The most important issue here is the trees. I think the principle of having a residential building on the site, I think it would be very difficult to oppose. With certainly just within 200 or 300 yards further up Chestnut Avenue at Marsden Close, there's an almost identical site where the back garden of properties in Chestnut Avenue has been used to build another property, a chalet bungalow. I think the issue in Oakhurst Close is slightly different in that when you drive into Oakhurst from Chestnut Avenue, those trees make a significant contribution to the local landscape. You are driving into a very green and pleasant area. So, and those trees, being quite mature, are visible over quite a wide area. And the applications were turned down in the past because of the problems of needing to preserve the tree roots. Whilst I can understand that you can get vehicular access by not digging in, I get that. But it still leaves you with, you're having to get the utilities into that property. And I'm intrigued to read in a report, excavated by airspace. It's not a term I'm familiar with. So I'd like an explanation, please, how the water, the electricity, I understand it won't have gas because it's going to have air-sourced heat pumps, but the utilities and the have to go in and the wastewater has to come out. How can that be achieved without doing damage to the trees? And what is excavation by airspace, please? I also noted in the report, have I got it right, that the permitted development rights are going to be taken away, so that would preclude a bungalow being turned into a chalet bungalow or a house. You're nodding, so I'm happy with that. But what I would like some reassurance is that how can we make sure that those trees that contribute so much to the local landscape aren't harmed?
So just to come back on those points, so it's just worth noting that no trees are proposed to be removed, and they are outside the curtilage of the area, and therefore there is no right for the applicant to remove those. Although we do understand the future pressures on those, the condition to submit that arboricultural statement will assess the impact on that. In terms of the utilities, that is a typo, it should say airspade. And that was discussed with the tree officer. There is, so to the southern boundary of the site, there are some dead tree stumps, and that is we're proposing to dig a trench by airspade, which reduces the harm. in that area only. And again, secured by condition, we've asked for a method statement. And yes, you're right, all permissive development rights have been removed. Thank you.
Right. Councillor Lammers.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, quick question. Could you just please tell me what an air spade is?
I'm not a specialist on the matter, but my understanding is it is the technology that would cause the least damage to the tree root. So from my understanding, it blasts air to excavate rather than using machinery. Am I right?
Okay.
Thank you.
That relates to my question, Chair, is basically, I agree with the ward councillor, who again I think is very ably representing his residents. This is an area I know extremely well, and I completely support the idea that these trees must be protected. They are absolutely integral to this street. So I just want assurances. Is it the case that they're not allowed to cut down the trees and that's the end of it, but they could muller them in the process, accidentally barge into one, then there's no recourse if they have to chop it down because it gets mouldy over time because the roots are all destroyed? Or are they like properly protected and the trees will stay there, you'll just fill in the space? That's basically the crux of my concern.
No, I completely understand your concerns because they are beautiful trees. In terms of the protection of the trees, it's outside my remits to do anything about those protection of the trees. All we can do is ensure that any development that comes forward minimises the harm to those trees. And we've done our best via conditions to ensure that that takes place, and lengthy discussions with the tree officer have taken place as part of the application.
Chairman, if I can just add to that, as Hannah has said, the conditions there require them to put those tree protection measures in place prior to construction starting. And then, as Hannah has explained, the air spade for the digging the trenches and for construction, the access. So we are as satisfied as we possibly can be that this work can be undertaken without mullering the trees, and I appreciate the word that you use there, because yes, they can be retained but so badly damaged. But no, that very much they can undertake this work if they do it properly without detriment to the tree roots or the trees, so they will stay looking like the Hannah's pictures.
Councillor Hackwell.
Thank you. Just some clarification on the most recent rejection. We rejected it because they could not demonstrate a no dig, and you're saying that they've now found a method of digging that's better than a no dig. I just don't understand. I mean, if we were, last time it was a concern that it would do damage, and I still see that it would do damage, air spade or not, to get the utilities in, and I just don't understand how you can do it without either damaging tree roots or whatever. And it is a lovely avenue, trees both sides, and to spoil that just because we accidentally bumped into one with a JCB or whatever would be terrible.
Sorry, Chairman, I totally understand that. We've all seen cases where accidents have, as you say, accidents have happened. These are our trees, so they're not just protected trees. These are our trees in terms of the council. We will be watching this very, very carefully. We will be making sure that these protection measures are put in place. Those of you who know my tree officer and have experienced him will know that trees are his life, and there is no way he'd be recommending us to approve this if he wasn't absolutely convinced that this work could be undertaken without causing damage to those trees. Yes, he has, yes.
I don't have anybody else who has indicated. I have to say, I'm somewhat surprised with all those refusals that it was only ever appealed once. I'm very surprised at that. Right, would you like to move the recommendation?
Madam Chairman, just before I do, can I check with Hannah, please? Because at the end of your presentation, you referred to quasi-conditions. I want to check with you, if I may, that you have incorporated all of those within conditions 1 to 14 as set out. And that we don't need to add any others on.
No, I'm satisfied. Conditions 9 to 11 address the tree measures that I've set out in terms of the method statement for the tree stump, arboriculture impact assessment, and the photographic and written record. And the remaining conditions remove permitted development rights.
I thank Hannah for that clarification, Madam Chairman, and I'm pleased to move the recommendation at page 211, which is approval, subject to conditions numbered 1 to 14. I move on that basis.
That's 14, Chairman.
The application for land east of Oakhurst Close is approved. So that takes us to agenda item 13, which is land to the rear of 56 to 60 Town Road, Cliffe. Kenny.
Thank you, Chairman. This application is for this land here. Members may recall this has been before you before, and this is the fourth iteration to this application being submitted. The reason this is being presented to members today is from the objection from the Parish Council, which raises concerns on overdevelopment of the site, being out of character with the area, and the negative impact of the proposal on highways. I will just show members what's been approved previously. So that is the application site there, and that's the site in question. And, oops, okay. This is just the photographs looking towards the side from the junction of Milton Road, going that way. And this is just looking from the site within, or looking within the site. And this is just some photographs sort of around the site, Milton Road, and the site itself currently overgrown. And this is the existing site plan. And as I previously said, there has been quite a lot of approvals for this site. The first sort of approved within the current local plan was in 2017 for this development here. That is the site, and that is how it's been cited within the application site, and that is the elevations. And then followed by another one in 2019 for a similar development and just reorientation of the property and just rearranging it, essentially. And the last one was 2020. Again, the applicants came in for an approval on the non-material application, but we refused that. Officers refused it because the amendments they were suggesting was going to be material, and when the application was submitted, we felt it was acceptable. However, it was a slightly modern take on what has been previously approved. And this is what is proposed now. So essentially, still within the site, set further forward so relates properly or better with the building line on properties on the east on Milton Road. And this is the elevation. It sort of takes features from existing properties in the area. The principle of this has already been set. Officers consider this design to also be acceptable. Impact on neighbors, no additional one noted from this proposal. And in terms of the highways and impact on highways as quoted by the Parish Council, there is still the condition that stops any front boundary wall going beyond a certain height on the front. I need to refer to my condition, but we do have a condition to limit the front, the height of the front boundary wall. And on that basis, officers still recommend approval, and members are requested to consider our recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Colleagues, any comment? No? Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Members, agenda item 13, page 225. I move the recommendation to approve the application subject to conditions numbered 1 to 14. I move on that basis.
That's 15, Chairman.
Thank you. The application for land at the rear of 5660 Town Road is approved. That takes us then to 188 Frindsbury Hill, Wainscott. Kemi.
Thank you, Chairman. This application for 188 Finsbury Hill, members may recall that 2 committees ago, similar applications were submitted for 190 and 192. So this is essentially an identical type of proposal, with the exception that this one proposes to put a conservatory on the rear, and the objection again from the parish council in terms of parking and turning and impact on highways from being able to have adequate turning point within the front of the site. I'd like to point members' attention to the supplementary agenda, where I'm just reporting the revision to the plan there, just to show the elevation of the conservatory that is being proposed. That's just the site there. There you go. There's a similar extension there. That's the application site there, and that's the rear of the property. And that is what is being proposed. So a side extension, conversion of the garage, and extension to the front and to the rear, and the conservatory on the rear, which is similar to others on the road. Officers recommend approval, and members are requested to consider our recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Tranter.
Chair, just a quick point on parish councils, and I know we listen very carefully to obviously their views on everything, but sometimes I feel that there's not enough substance to their concerns, and it takes a lot of time for officers in this committee to look at them. This would appear to me to be something that could have been answered without needing to come to the full committee. I just wanted to make that point, if I may, generally, and it might be something we need to do in terms of briefing some of our excellent parish councillors, you know, in how they approach some of these applications. But there's been several this evening. I've chosen this particular one to raise it, but I think there's a piece of work to be done, and perhaps we could pick that up later, but I've no problem with the application. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I don't have anybody else who's indicated, so I go to the Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Agenda item 14 from page 237. I move the recommendation for approval, which is subject to conditions numbered 1 to 5 in members' agenda papers. So moved.
Seconded. Thank you. Those in favour?
That's 15, Chairman.
Thank you. The application for 188 Frindsbury Hill, Wainscott is approved. That takes us to Westfield Town Road, Cliffe Woods. Again, we have a new face, Aaron Nichols, and he's going to present this.
Thank you, Chair. So the application is being brought to the committee on the grounds of Parish Council's objections in relation to highway safety. So some history on the site. There was an application in 2004 to turn the units into residential. This was rejected. And then another application in 2004 for use of the garages for Class B1 for the depollution end of life of vehicles. This was granted. And then another application in 2012 for change of use from industrial Class B1 previously granted to vehicle repair and servicing with ancillary tyre fitting. This was rejected. So, this is a site plan with the area in red. So the application is for the change of use of the garage to a beauty treatment room with associated visitor parking spaces. The proposed block plan on the left side shows the application area in red, with the wider area in blue also in the applicant's ownership. The aerial view on the right-hand side shows the application site, which is situated near the urban boundary of Cliffe Woods on the west of the B200 town road. The existing garage block sits within the front garden of the property with access from the driveway via a gate, which is shown on the application on the right. The affected garage block is laid out as a double garage, which has the lawful B1 use for the depollution end of life of vehicles, and a single garage with only the single garage proposed to be converted as part of this application. The only external changes proposed to the building are for the removal of the garage door and the insertion of a shopfront UPVC door and windows. Here are a couple of site shots. So the picture number 1 shows the unit garage area that will be part of this application. And then number 2 shows the area which will be the free parking spaces for visitors. And this slide shows the access arrangement from the highways. These will remain unchanged. These images show the site access from multiple views from the site onto the B200 town road. It's not considered the proposal would result in any acceptable impact to highway safety or highway function, and it's considered that this change of use will not detrimentally impact on the character of the area, nor will it impact on the highway safety, and for this reason the application is recommended for approval subject to the recommended conditions.
Thank you. Right, do I have any member? No? Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thanks to Aaron for his report to us. Having heard that, no members wishing to speak, I move for agenda item 15 from page 243, the recommendation be approved subject to the conditions set out, i.e. those numbered 1 to 5. I so move. Thank you.
Seconded. Those in favour?
That's 15, Chairman.
The application for Westfield Town Road, Cliffe Woods is approved. Members, the next item on your agenda, which is the Housing Delivery Test Action Plan update, is a significant document. It is my suggestion that at this time of the night, these documents don't get the proper consideration that they are due. And would you be willing for this to go over to the next committee in the hope that that agenda is not as big as this one? Can I ask for a vote on that? Those who would support that?
That's 14, Chairman.
Thank you. So if I can say that that concludes the business in the open part of this meeting, I ask the Vice Chairman to move exclusion of the press and public.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So we've moved to agenda item 17.